There is exactly 2 months now between now and November the 5th when the United States will go to polls and choose between Kamala Harris, the incumbent vice president and the Democratic nominee, and Donald Trump, the former president and the Republican nominee. The choice could not be more stark. Kamala Harris, of course, for the last 4 years under the shadow of President Biden. President Biden had to withdraw from the race after a disastrous debate performance against Donald Trump back in June. And Trump, of course, is a known commodity. He was president between 2016 and 2020, known for his rather radical views, and, of course, clinching the Republican Party's nomination, particularly after the big bump that he got in the polls after the assassination attempt that happened in mid-July. But now, Kamala Harris, after the Democratic National Convention, which happened in Chicago in the third week of August, has got a bit of a bump in the polls. She's leading anywhere between 1 to 3% in the national polls, but that is very much within the scope of error or the margin of error. So even today, it is very much a dead heat. It is still a contest that is too close to call. And ultimately, it's not the popular vote that will decide who is going to be the next US president. It is the Electoral College. And in that Electoral College, it boils down to about half a dozen battleground or swing states. Who may hold the edge in those swing states? Because whoever has the edge in those swing states ultimately will go on to win the presidency. So who will it be? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? To try and dive a little more deeper into the presidential race in the United States as it stands today, with exactly about 9 weeks to go, is Mr. Ian Bremmer. He's president of the Eurasia Group, one of the most prolific political scientists and authors, and somebody who's got a very keen eye on what's going on in the domestic politics of the United States. Thank you very much, Mr. Bremmer, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. What is your assessment of the state of the U.S. presidential race as it stands today? We've had multiple polls come out just in the last week since the conclusion of the Democratic National Convention. Most of those polls, the Reuters poll, the Wall Street Journal poll, even a Fox News poll, suggesting that Kamala Harris has a lead of anywhere between 1 to 3%, but all of that is very much within the margin of error. So what's your reading of how the race stacks up as of today?
Yeah, certainly it is true that Biden was facing a landslide against him, and Kamala Harris has erased that gap. If you look at the critical swing state polls right now that are, could go either way, it's where the election is going to be decided. They are all now within the margin of error of the poll takers. In other words, this race could clearly go either way. You might argue that Kamala Harris has a little bit of an advantage right now, but we are about 2 months away from the election. It is right after the convention. She hasn't had her debate with Trump yet, her first, maybe only debate. There's a lot of time to play. So what you would say, I think, if you want to be confident, is that this is a very, very close race.
I do want to talk to you a little bit about some of the polls that we've seen, particularly when Trump is the opponent, when Trump is the Republican candidate. We saw this in 2016 as well, when all the polls were saying that Hillary Clinton was the leading candidate, and some of them even said that she'll win very easily. And what emerged later on was that the Trump voters, or the potential Trump voters, were deliberately not revealing to pollsters that they are going to vote for Trump. For whatever reason, maybe they don't want to reveal, maybe they were embarrassed about saying it, or whatever reason, there was definitive underreporting of the Trump vote. Do you see that happening this time as well, or do you not see that phenomenon repeat itself 8 years from then?
I think it's true that there are people that are shy about talking to a pollster about Trump. Let's face it, if you're a Trump voter, you don't trust the mainstream media. You don't trust a lot of established leaders. You certainly don't trust a lot of pollsters. So you're less likely to pick up the phone when they call and speak honestly or speak at all. Having said that, what we do know is we can compare the same polls a few months ago with the polls now. And we can say that there may be inherent bias in those polls, but they clearly have shifted much more dramatically in favor of Harris. We also know one poll in the United States is how many people are donating to campaigns. That's how many people are opening their wallets. And
Yeah.
small scale contributors, people that are giving less than $20, sort of rank and file Americans, far more of those have decided to give, and a lot of first time donors that have never given money in any campaign before are giving to Kamala Harris and not giving to Trump. So that, even if you don't look at polls, there are other indicators that tell you that Harris is doing well. You can look at the ratings, the Nielsen ratings for how many people were watching the Democratic convention compared to the Republican convention. The Democrats did a little bit better by that poll, if you will, than the Republicans did. So again, there are reasons that you would believe that right now Harris is a little bit in front. She's got a little bit more enthusiasm, but again, that is, she's a new candidate, even though she's been vice president for almost
Yeah.
4 years. So it's not surprising that she would have more momentum. That's going to be hard to maintain for the next 2 months. Also, the Electoral College has a small structural bias in favor of Republicans. It's easier for a Republican to win with fewer votes. That helps Trump.
I do want to ask you, so if it does indeed become a Harris presidency, the most pressing issue that she will have to face, of course, are the two ongoing wars, the one between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, and also the Russia-Ukraine war. If Harris becomes president, do you see a more decisive or a forceful pushback from a Harris White House, from a Harris presidency, at least as far as the Israel-Hamas war is concerned, to try and find a ceasefire? And also, what happens in the Russia-Ukraine war? Will they be able to find some kind of a middle ground, get both Russia and Ukraine down to the negotiating table?
I think there's a bigger difference on the Middle East between Harris and Trump than there is on Russia-Ukraine. On Russia-Ukraine, both Harris and Trump would like the war to be over. They'd like to have a sustainable ceasefire. Both Harris and Trump value Ukrainian security. They think it's important for the United States. I know Trump says a whole bunch of different things, but the reality is that $61 billion approved by Congress wouldn't have happened if Trump didn't tell Speaker of the House Johnson that he wanted it approved. So I think the difference between Trump and Harris on Russia-Ukraine is that Trump is much more willing to act unilaterally and tell Zelensky and Putin, here's what the deal needs to be, where Harris would coordinate with U.S. allies, with NATO, and also with Ukraine before making that move. So there's more uncertainty, more volatility in what a Trump administration would do. But I do think the general parameters are not all that different. Now, on the Middle East, it's quite different. On the Middle East, Harris is much more sympathetic to the Palestinian position, to a true two-state solution, to wanting to ensure that Palestinian human rights are taken care of, opposing a continued occupation by the Israeli government of Gaza. Trump does not feel that way. Trump used to support a two-state solution. He says that time has passed. He no longer does. He supports the politics of the far right in Israel. I think he would be fine. I think Kamala Harris would not feel that level of prioritization. Trump really cares a lot about the countries that are willing to write really big checks, and the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris. Those are those countries for Trump. That matters less for Kamala Harris.
I do want to ask you, either presidency, either a Harris presidency or a Trump presidency, what may that mean for India, and particularly in the context of U.S.-India ties? We know that when Trump was president, he was very pro-India, but he was kind of fixated on the idea of tariffs, and he made a big deal about the Harley-Davidson tariffs and so on, even when he came to India on a visit. If Harris were to be president, the other concern for India is, will her government, will her White House be very heavy when it comes to things like religious freedoms and freedom of minorities, freedom of the press, etc.? Or do you see, again, both presidencies more or less similar when it comes to their outlook to U.S.-India?
I don't think so. I actually think that Harris would be very interested in continuing a strong relationship with India through the Quad, in particular, also bilaterally. She was very welcomed when she made her trip to India. As you know, she has Indian parentage. She's very proud of it, and she was very engaged on that trip. She also has a very similar outlook on China as the Biden administration and sees India as a critical counterbalance for the United States in security relations more broadly across Asia. So, in that regard, I think that India, as well as Modi specifically, have some of the least risk in the outcome of the US presidential election of any country out there. India is really in a very good position with the United States, irrespective of who becomes president next January.
All right. Ian Bremmer, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us and putting your thoughts into perspective, both on the state of the U.S. race as it stands today and also what may a Harris presidency or a Trump presidency mean in the context of ties between New Delhi and Washington.